Hello, this is Brett Cutler, designer of Nous, and I'm going to talk about all the dead ends we explored that were necessary to make this game. Nous is a game that went through a lot of changes in its development, enough that by the end, Nous was defined by its mutability. AwesomeSharkVolcano, the name of our team, was a gathering of the best and the brightest. The glue that held us together was not a game idea or personal relationships, but the drive to create something great. Whenever we evaluated our work, it was on that single metric. Will this wow people? Will it inspire them? Is it significant? Lacking a unifying concept, we were almost subject to throw everything out and start again. It was a dangerous combination. We were good enough to know that we could make something better, but we didn't have a genius idea to hang something great off of. It started out as Spaceburnium. The high concept was a 2D brawler built around small planetoids, with players always aligned toward the center of the nearest planetoid, similar to certain levels of Super Mario Galaxy. The player would defend against waves of robotic invaders coming to drain the Spaceburnium core of your planets. Implementation started with making the character move properly. Once that was working, a physics bug led us to accidentally come up with our slam, an enormously powerful jump off the current planet, followed by a crushing return that sent sparks and impact shooting into space. We coupled it with slow motion and desaturation, and it felt good. It was simple, but it was fun. Unfortunately, it never got any farther. We were having difficulties working out level designs, enemy patterns, and longer-term gameplay with this mode, and were considering dropping it when we made the chase game. Our simple metaball hack created some very impressive looking goo that, if set to chase the player, would congregate and split up in visually interesting ways. We added a gravity toggle, so that the player could fly freely through space, but holding a button would enable gravity towards the nearest planet. This allowed the player to slingshot around planets to outmaneuver the faster but less nimble goo. It had a few problems. It was difficult to signal which planet the player would be attracted to if they turned on gravity. It was hard to disengage gravity at the right time to get exactly the angle the player wanted. Requiring rotational accuracy is a tall order because minute differences can yield vastly different outcomes as the player goes flying away. It might make for a fine challenge as a boss mechanic in a game like Mario 64, but it gets frustrating when it is a core movement mechanic, and mistakes in movement were punished over harshly. To encourage players to work for fast, efficient routes, a long acceleration curve was used, but this made mistakes have a huge impact on the player's average speed. They were liable to get pounded. Still, we moved forward on the chase game idea because it was the best prototype we had. There was no point, we felt, in waiting for a great idea to come to us. We had to work with what we had while continuing to keep our options open. At this time, we also revamped our theme. Spaceburnium lacked a strong, iconic character. We came up with Dr. Gravity, a scientist forgotten to history who had invented gravity. We recorded voice samples and developed him as a gruff old man. It was a fun, crafty style, contrasting vibrant, saturated space backgrounds with lots of wood artifacts from his world. While this was going on, I added depth to the chasing game. I took inspiration from the newly released Pac-Man Championship Edition DX, and built levels around a replenishing breadcrumb trail of collectibles. Once the player picked enough up, an attacking power spawned, and it disabled the chasing goo and afforded the player an opportunity to destroy them. I planned to build a combo system such that the player could court danger by waking large numbers of enemies, and rack up the points when the reversal occurred. But it wasn't good enough, still. We decided to explore radically new gameplay and themes, and came back with prototypes. I kept the goo and built a melee game, with fleeing enemies that spawned smaller goo. The player's attack was a charged move that, while charging, sucked in enemies, setting the scene for a chain of attacks outward. This felt fun and fresh, even though it was simple. We put Dr. Gravity in this world and it didn't feel right. We had already decided to abandon the space theme for a more abstract style to save on art production, but now the hand-drawn character sprite of the Doctor clashed against the polygonal enemies and block color backgrounds. Dr. Gravity just wasn't working anymore. Since our abstract look was working, we took it in the logical direction, abstract and computery. We came up with Nous, the AI personality who acts as the player's higher intelligence, pushing them through the action game scenarios to find uncomfortable moral decisions for players to make. This is what spurred the addition of the friendly blue goo, the converters to exchange hostile goo for friendlies, and the allowance of a passive gameplay track. All this, and I couldn't count on the player providing an interesting story. It turns out to be very difficult to write a character arc for a character you don't control, namely the player. And at that time, Nous relied upon forcing the player to make decisions by recasting the abstract enemies as different real-world scenarios, that of a law officer putting down a riot, or a rebel overthrowing the government. But how could I raise the stakes if the player had decided what they were going to do at the beginning of the game? Nous had to change again. This last time, Nous became about Nous itself, about the ever-changing development it had been through. Nous now spoke directly to the player as a computer program who couldn't figure out what it was for. Every project has an energy running through it, unique to that project and reflecting those who work on it. It was only fitting that Nous came to reflect what had defined it. our indecisiveness, and our striving.